Many organizations jump into analytics thinking that all they need is some data, an analytics toolkit, and a data analyst. Or they think that data and analytics is something that the IT folks do. Occasionally, I meet a business professional who is really keen about analytics, and they understand that data is a business asset, and they would like to help their organization adopt those data-driven decision-making practices, but they're not really sure where to start. If one of these scenarios describes you, your management team, or the various stakeholders within your organization, then this video is for you. In this video, I will identify the prerequisites and the initiatives that are necessary to transform your enterprise culture and the environment into one that supports data-driven decision-making. I'll also provide several practical tips on how business analysts and other business professionals can support these initiatives and drive the culture change from inside your organization, creating that environment that will enable data and analytics and provide the insight that upper management desires. What you're about to listen to is a live recording of an interactive session that I facilitated with the IIBA Palmetto chapter on February 16th, 2022. During this session, I provided a little bit of theory and several practical examples of things that business professionals can do to enable analytics from the working level within their organization to support the development of that data and analytics culture. Now, before we get going, if you like what you hear, click that thumbs up icon. And if you want to be notified when I publish additional content, click that subscribe button. Of course, if you have questions about how to proceed with this transformation, or if you're looking for additional guidance about something related to data and business analysis, please leave a comment in that section below and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you for that wonderful glowing recommendation and introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here. When Olivia approached me about speaking to the Palmetto chapter, I wasn't really quite sure, do I do one of my practice presentations or do I create something new? And then she planted the seed about, well, maybe you could do something about data. And I said, oh, okay, I can write a whole brand new presentation. So what you're about to see is a world premiere of a Projerra presentation. And I really appreciate the opportunity, as well as the opportunity to speak with you here tonight. So Olivia and I came up with this title, Enabling Data Analysis Success. And then the more I thought about it, this isn't a presentation about you, the individual, and enabling your success. It's really about enabling your organization and making sure that your organization is the environment that will support your success as an analyst. Because it's that traditional garbage in, garbage out. If your data is miserable, Swiss cheese full of holes, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. So this is really focusing on what you can do as a BA to help your organization establish that foundation to enable your success at analysis and analytics. And before we go too much further, I do want to preface and say, if you have questions at any point in time, by all means, take yourself off mute and jump in there with a question. I'm not necessarily watching the screen. I'm going to be watching my presentation. I may not see a hand being raised, but I do want to make sure that you get the answers to your questions in the moment. There's no point in holding on to it for 50 minutes and then you've forgotten the point anyway. So we're going to get going. Just a quick little question for you to consider. What do you think are the prerequisites for success in data analysis? I've already told you, you got to have good data, but what other things do you need for success? Okay, guys, this is where you have to take yourself off mute and help me here. We're supposed to have like a conversation.
Okay, so Judy chimed in to the chat that you've got to have good data governance.
Ah, yes, maybe I should open up the chat window. Here, we'll open up the chat window. I'll move this over here. Good data governance is important. Yes, that's making sure that everybody understands the right terms in the right way, understands what the processes are for modifying the data if there is anything. Any other things that you think you need?
A good knowledge of the data that's there.
Yeah, well, good knowledge of the data, good knowledge of the techniques, because there's a lot of techniques out there. And when I was taking that exam, I found a few that I hadn't heard of before. So you're always going to find new techniques. You're right. There's a lot of things that we need. So you do need the data. You do need some smart people. And there's many, many other elements. So we're going to be talking about some of those elements today. Now, for those of you that have done a little bit of data, think back to your first data analysis assignment. And for those of you that haven't done data before, I'm going to pose one for you. You arrive on the job, imagine you're a freshly minted data business analyst. The boss asks you to report on product sales for the past 3 years, identify the top 10 products by sales and by quantity, where are those products manufactured, who are the top 10 clients, and where are the top 10 retail locations. Seems pretty straightforward to me. I recognize if you're new to data, that might seem a little bit scary. So first thing you need to do is you need to look at your data landscape. You have to figure out, where is this data? How do I get it? And if you have an enterprise data warehouse where the sales, the detailed sales, the aggregated sales, all the manufacturing information, you've got a master data list, you've got reference data. If you have all of that, count yourself extremely lucky, because all of that is already there. It's clean, it's integrated. All you have to do is point your reporting application at the database. Doesn't matter whether you're using Power BI or Tableau or even Excel. As long as you have it in a data warehouse, it's relatively easy to generate that report. Now, probably what you'll find is that you'll have a combination. You're going to have some databases, you're going to have some spreadsheets, some of it will be inside your organization, some of it is going to be interspersed around different locations in the country. Maybe you'll have different locations around the world, but you're going to have data in silos. It's going to be isolated, independent from each other. That production data is separate from the product delivery data, is separate from the client list. And not only is it separate, but it's incomplete. You're missing addresses, you're missing names, you're missing telephone numbers, and you could have data in multiple locations. If I had a Rue Saint John versus a John Street, guess what? You might think they're the same, or are they different? So just maybe a show of hands, some quick voices, some chat. How many of you think you work in an environment where there's an enterprise data warehouse? And how many of you think you work in an environment where everything is sprinkled around like we have on this presentation? And how many have absolutely no idea what your data landscape looks like? So Olivia says she's got stuff sprinkled around. Most people do. Most organizations have a combination of data. If you have an enterprise data warehouse, as I said, you're a very mature organization and it's relatively easy to do analysis. Anything else, you've got a challenge. So what do? You're probably not going to throw your hands up and walk away. That would not be a smart career move. What you probably will do is produce the reports that you can with the data that you find. Yeah, it might be a little bit messy, some holes here and there, but you'll do what you can. And you're also, if you're really smart, if you're really intelligent, you'll take this as an opportunity to work with the stakeholders to help them understand their responsibility for developing and maintaining that data. Because really what we have to realize is that data is not an IT responsibility, it's actually a business responsibility. And that's a change in culture for some organizations. They think data, databases, IT, not something for business people to worry about, but that's actually completely backwards. Data supports the business processes. Data is generated by business processes, and thus data is a business asset. Now, a few weeks ago, IIBA published the 6 data business analysis skills that they're in high demand. They had a nice little email, and they reference the 6 practices that are defined in that guide to business data analytics. And this is when Olivia and I had the conversation about, let's do this as a presentation. So I looked at it and said, okay, identifying the proper business problem. I know that's difficult for some, but in the world of data, it's actually kind of easy. So we're not going to be talking about that one today. Ensuring that you have accurate, quality, and accessible data, that's a very difficult challenge, and we will be speaking about that today. Identifying and verifying and reporting results, that's also a little bit of a challenge, but we won't be focusing on that today. And likewise, we won't be focusing on how to influence decision makers, because those are both relatively easy. But we will be focusing on how do you build that data culture, that enterprise trust in the data, to say, yeah, I believe this report. Because there's nothing worse than when the VP of marketing has one set of stats and the VP of finance has a different set of stats, and they tell a different story. You want to have a common location so that the data is one consistent story across the organization. If you have competing data sets, nobody trusts the data, and that is a real challenge to overcome. And then, of course, once you've designed that data culture, you're designing the workflows. So as I mentioned, today's focus is really on how do you ensure that the data you're using is accurate, consistent, and accessible, and it produces quality results. How do you have good quality data for your analysis? And then how do you build the data culture and the trust in the data to help you get that quality data? We won't be focusing so much on the workflows today, because I view that as a natural evolution of once you've got the quality data, once you've built the data culture, developing it into the workflows is just going to come as second nature to most people. Everybody with me so far? Okay, so really, this is what we're going to be talking about today. If you live in a world where you have data silos, where your data is not integrated, where you have some people like, oh, the VP of manufacturing says, I can't share that with anybody. This is private. I don't want to tell them how good or bad we're doing at manufacturing, or I don't want the HR data to be public. That's sensitive information. Where people view that data is an IT asset, we need to move towards a world where you have integrated data. And integrated data doesn't just mean in one location, but it means that it's connected. It can be held and integrate in many different locations because we're global enterprises. We have offices located in many different countries, and you need data consistently around the world. But the data is open, the data is accessible, the data is shared, and they recognize that quality data is everyone's responsibility. And it's also part of all business processes. You don't start a business process without thinking about, well, what data is important to this process and how are we going to store that data? As a BA, thinking about the data generated by a process is just as important as thinking about the process. I've been doing this for so long. I talked to Olivia and said, I've been doing data since at least 1995 and maybe even 1992. So I've been doing data my entire career. Not only that, I've been doing a lot of bits and pieces, but the data has always been a part of what I have done. So it's important as a BA to have that ability to flip-flop back and forth and recognize where the connections are. The one key thing I want you to get out of today's presentation is that I think business analysts drive and reinforce the initiatives that support the culture within their enterprise to create the environment to enable data analysis activities. You as a BA are not just a consumer of the data, but you're actually driving, you're transforming the enterprise culture related to data. It could be a little bit of an uncomfortable role for some BAs. A lot of people I mean think, well, I just generate requirements, I write specifications, maybe I'll do a chart here and there. But really, BAs are in a pretty powerful position to initiate change. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is how do you initiate the change? Okay, so it's a couple of a step process. It starts with developing that accurate quality data and making sure that data is accessible to people across the organization. That is, of course, supported by the data and information management practices and that data governance that Judy mentioned earlier. Those are all part and parcel of the same piece. And then that is supported by data literacy across the organization for everyone in the organization, not just the IT folks, but the business folks, the marketing, production, the finance, the admin assistants. Everybody has to learn to be data savvy. Okay, they don't have to be data experts, but they have to understand the difference between a row and a column. They have to understand why it's important to use master data and reference data, and why they don't want to be copying that database onto a spreadsheet and then putting it on a USB disk and sending it that USB stick over to somebody else. There's elements of how you work with data that are critical to ensuring the integrity of the data. And that all goes to creating your enterprise culture to give you that trusted data collection, to making sure that it's integrated into the business processes and a part of what everybody is doing. All right, first pause. Any questions, any concerns?
Hi, this is Judy.
Hey, Judy.
I have a question. While at the individual level, you have responsibility to help make changes around data. How do you get senior management involved to support that across the organization?
Well, I think it's ask them. Usually you'll have a senior management person come to you and say, I need this in report. And you're going to respond back to them and sort of say, I can give you this, but if our data was more complete, then I could provide this and this and this. Talk to them about the limitations of what they have today and the opportunity or the business value of what could come if there was greater investment in the data culture or greater investment in data literacy and training. And then they can realize that, yeah, okay, we need to invest in the technology and in the people, and we need to train everybody to think this way so that we can improve our bottom line. Like, you have to make the connection about what it is that they want as an organization and how having a better data environment will help them reach that goal. And then you can sort of say, well, I need you to be a data champion. I need you to support this message across all of the other directors or all of the other VPs, because yeah, a lonely manager in manufacturing or a lonely IT manager in data analytics isn't going to have a lot of clout. But if you can sell the business value to the higher ups in your chain and then get them to relay the business value to their peers and gradually build a swell of opportunity and like, wow, isn't this cool and isn't this neat and we need this, it'll come gradually. But you're right, you do need a champion. Does that help a little bit?
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, let's carry on. So data is good, but data is a number. And who knows if that data is right or accurate or not. So it is important that the data be accurate. Now, what does accuracy mean? There's lots of different ways that data can be accurate. But what you want to do is make sure that you, unless you have the accuracy, you definitely can't produce quality results. Just because you have accurate data doesn't mean you're going to produce the right answer, or you could have a problem in your calculation or the way you're presenting things in the chart. So accurate data does not guarantee quality, but poor data quality, you have no hope of providing any insight or any results. So it is important that you have data that is precise, that is consistent, that is accurate, that provides the proper coverage of the space, that is accessible. All of these nice little things that are in the chart here are criteria that you need to evaluate your data for to ensure that it makes it possible for you to do your analysis. Now, I'm not going to do a deep dive into how you achieve that today, but maybe that can be a topic for another day. The general question I do want to pose for you is, we got all of these smart people. We've got the computer technology. We've got scanners. We've got all kinds of ways to collect data and store data and manage data. So why is it so difficult to get quality data? Anybody out there awake?
Hey, it's Paul.
Hey, Paul, how are you in
Could it-
Ottawa?
I'm great. Could it be the classic traditional, garbage in, garbage out, right? It's the weakest link is always going to be the people interfacing with the systems.
Bingo, it's the people. We have so much data entry that is done by people. And as I said, if we have Rue Saint-Jean versus John Street, is it the same or is it not? If you spell street, S-T, S-T-R, S-T-R-E-E-T, like how many different ways can you spell street? The database will see those as unique entries, but to us as humans, they're not. And that causes part of the challenge. Some people will sort of say, oh, well, yeah, Bob moved, but I forgot to update his address. Well, all of a sudden, Bob's record is no longer meaningful. It really depends upon the people, the humans that are doing the data entry, that are doing the data management to make sure that it is accurate. So data can be incomplete. There's lots of typos. It could out of date, language differences. There's many, many other reasons why data could be sloppy or full of holes or invalid. So how do we really do this better? We need to produce that high quality, clean data. And it really comes down to BAs. You need to be the coach, the guide, the mentor, impressing upon the business people, impressing upon anybody that's entering data to make sure that they have clean data and that they go back and they actually correct invalid data. I worked with a government department about 6 months ago, and whenever we would find, he was trying to do some analysis, I had a peer, and he'd realize, hey, we're missing an entry here. He didn't just ignore it. He actually called up the business owner and said, hey, can you add an entry for this particular country code? And sure enough, what they did, a week later, that entry was there. But it was the business person who had the courage to pick up the phone and say, hey, the data is incomplete. I need you to fill in that data. It wasn't his responsibility to do it, but he knew who to talk to in the organization to make that correction. There's a lot of people I meet where they say, oh, I'm missing the data. That's okay. We're just not going to report on that today. But that's part of the problem. When you become complacent, then you're not going to have quality data. You're not going to have quality reports. As a BA, you can encourage people to make that call. You can encourage them, or you can pick up the phone and say, hey, the data is not complete. Please clean it. But if you're not working with the data directly, you have to guide them and coach them that they're supposed to do that. And help that business team realize that data is their asset. Data is feeding their process and their insight. And that's where it comes back to, you want to produce a report on manufacturing, you need clean manufacturing data, so you can reduce a report back to the VP of manufacturing to tell him how his line is doing. It's really to support their decision-making, the decision-making by the managers, by the directors, by the VPs. The data quality is not for the analyst. The data quality is for that consumer of the report, for the consumer of the chart, of the dashboard. And it's really their responsibility to make sure that the input is clean for that analysis to be successful. So once again, data that stands alone, data is just a number. You need to have that data integrated with the environment around it, with the context, so that it makes sense. If I tell you that I scored 5, or hey, Angelina's daughter scored 1,500, great score. But if the maximum score was 3,000, that leaves you a little different perception than if when we know that the maximum score was 1,520. You need to understand numbers in context to each other. Okay, so we talk about integration. What on earth is integration? It's all about combining data residing in different sources. So it could be from 2 different databases. It could be from 2 different spreadsheets. It's just 2 different information. So we have the manufacturing results and the list of questions and the list of sites for manufacturing. All of a sudden, that allows you to answer questions that you couldn't when you just had one set of data. Paul, I see a little ring around your person. I'm not sure if you're trying to have a question or not. Okay, I'll just, if there is, just jump on in. Okay, so data integration is all about collaboration between internal and external users. What on earth does that mean? It really is about, okay, so you need sort of collaboration of people within one department, and maybe you need collaboration between the business users and the IT people that are supporting the database. And maybe you even need collaboration between the people that are here in Ottawa and the people in Montreal and the people down in South Carolina, because guess what? They're all from different departments of the same organization and they need to collaborate. But it can also mean collaboration with external people. And I'm talking international standards here. Remember that 3-character code that is used to identify airports? That's an international standard. The airport in Ottawa doesn't decide it's going to pick its own characters, and the airport in Florida doesn't get to pick their own characters. There's an international body that defines the characters for every single airport, and that is where the external collaboration comes from. And then once you've got all of these, you need to integrate them and put them from a heterogeneous database system of databases and spreadsheets transformed into that single coherent data store. And by that, I don't want you to think it has to be a giant data warehouse. That's not what I mean when I'm talking about a single coherent data store. But I am talking about a single data model where they're all connected and they're all integrated. You could have the purple one as a separate database and the blue one as a separate database, but there's a well-defined relationship between them. And yeah, you could have the green things tucked on the side as a spreadsheet that's pulled in where it needs to be. But they are all transformed and they're all working together. Now, for those of you that are studying for your CBDA or Business Data Analytics, I've got a couple acronyms here for you, ETL and ELT. And yes, I've spelled them out here on the bottom. But what's the major distinction? Why do we flip the letters around? Does anybody know? It's a pretty key distinction because you're going to have all of this data that you're extracting from the different source systems. And if you're on premise, you do the transformation locally and then you load it into your destination repository. Relatively makes an awful lot of sense. But if you're working in the cloud, what you do is you extract it, you move it up to the cloud, you load it into the cloud, and then you transform it in the destination because you can take advantage of all the extra CPU power that's up there. And you'd want to be minimizing the number of ups and downs that you do. So there's 2 different approaches because you're minimizing the cost of moving things up and down, and you're maximizing the fact that you've got all this extra CPU power up there in your virtual environment. Okay, let me see where we're at here. Any questions so far? Have I lost anybody?
No, you're doing great, Stephanie. And I think that little explanation that you gave is provides a little bit more context than sometimes we see in the guide. So very good.
Okay, great. Well, there's a few more contexts coming up here. So data transformation is expensive. Yes, it's the time, it's the people, it's the resources, it's the CPU cycles, all that kind of good stuff. So we want to do what we can to minimize unnecessary transformations. Some of it, yeah, you have to do transformations, but you don't have to do unnecessary. So we want to encourage the business teams to reuse standard data sets when they can, so that they're reducing the data duplication and reducing the transformation. Now, what are we talking about here when I say, why is data duplication a problem? Why does it matter if I take a copy of the customer data and I give it to Olivia, she keeps it on her desktop, and then she gives a copy to Leanne? Now we've got 3 copies of the customer data because, hey, we're always working with customers.
Yeah, but they're not always in sync. Like if
Oh, good job, Andrea. Yes, exactly. If I happen to be somebody who's on the telephone in customer support and Bob calls to say, hey, you know what, our headquarters just moved, please update our account. So I update the account, my master data is up to date, great. But I forgot that I gave Olivia a copy. And then meanwhile, Leanne's on vacation. So even if Olivia sent it to her, well, maybe it got lost somewhere. And yes, things get out of sync. And that can be a real problem. Not to account for the fact that, yeah, now we've got all of this, that there's a security risk of all this information floating around. And it depends if it's just a small file, that's okay. But if it's a 50 megabyte file, you don't want to have 50 megabytes floating around multiple times. So what I want you to recognize is that there's actually two standard data sets that should never be duplicated. One of them is master data. These are enterprise standards that are specific to your organization. So it's the list of products, the list of locations, job classifications, clients. It's information specific to your organization. And it's, as I said, sourced with inside your organization. There should be somebody that's identified as the business owner for that data. I'll tell you about those definitions in a little while. And they're responsible for the quality of that data. They're the ones that get to define who uses that data and how it's shared. There's another set of data called reference data. And this is the data that is national and international standards that comes from outside your organization. That's that list of airport codes. It's the list of province and state codes. It's the list of country codes. And let me tell you about country codes, because as our world map changes, countries get created and countries go away, and keeping your country codes up to date can be a challenge. Just like time zone codes. I used to work in telecom, and we had a standard list of like 10 area codes for Canada. And now I'm seeing all these, I've memorized Canadian NPAs or area codes back in the 90s. And now I see all these other area codes. And it's like, I'm thinking, we've always got to keep that changing and keep that informed. Even these international standards are not static. It's important that they stay up to date. So master and reference data, in my opinion, should be defined once in the organization, whether and they have to be owned by a business person, a business stakeholder. They are considered the business owner, and then there should be referenced or reused. So that doesn't mean copying it, but you have a pointer to, or you pull the data when you need it. These master data sets or reference data sets are known as that single source of the truth, where you're always going to get it direct from the source as opposed to a copy. So without that single source of the truth, we're going to have the variation, we're going to have the gaps. And whenever there is a gap or a difference, that leads to lack of trust. Remember I mentioned, well, the financial report says this and the manufacturing report says that. And then the VPs are wondering, well, whose data is right? So all the business teams, regardless of their function, should be contributing their data to something called the single source of the truth. If it can sit inside an enterprise data warehouse, all the better. If not, at least they recognize who is the owner of the marketing data, who is the owner of the finance data, who is the owner of that location list, so that we know all of the regional offices and all of the local offices, particularly in the bank. And I'm sure there's many different Desjardins locations across Quebec. Somebody has to be the owner of that master list of all the locations. And they need to know, well, where are the insurance offices? Where are the bank teller offices? Where are the sort of back office offices that don't actually meet people, but where they're churning numbers all the time? Somebody needs to know where those locations are. And it's only defined once. And then when you need to generate all these reports, well, you're pulling that data from your single source of the truth, not from Anne's local copy of the locations, which could be different from Amy's local version of the locations. So it is important, at a minimum, absolute minimum, that the reference data and enterprise data come from an enterprise repository. It would be nice if it was a database. I don't know if it can be in a database. I don't want to commit to say that it has to be in a database, but it certainly would be helpful if it was. So what can a BA do to support this within your organization? Once again, speak upon the business value of integration, eliminating the silos, stopping the data duplication, making sure that you have the consistent data, and encouraging them to use the master and reference data. People are leery about, well, I can't trust the data put together by that team. It's not right. Or they do it for speed. I'm working with a team right now and I'm looking for, okay, well, where is our master client list? Nobody wants to take responsibility for the master client list. There's only 40 of them. It's not a huge list. It should be relatively simple to put together. So, okay, well, I've got 41 over here and I've got 45 over there. Well, what about these 4 that are different? Are they clients or are they not? And then you have to take it to the next step. Well, who's the key contact and what's the acronym? And nobody wants to have that single responsibility for defining the client list. But yet everybody reports on clients in their reports. So we should have a standard list of clients somewhere. Now, all of this comes down to having the master data and reference data, having some processes in there to manage it, having some processes in there to communicate the changes. Because unless everybody's pulling from one place, you definitely have to replicate it. And that introduces risk, as we've spoken about. And just really do try to encourage them to sort of say, I know you're used to having this local copy, but it's risky. Do you mind pulling that information from the master database once a day? Now, there is a little bit of performance lag. Granted, I wouldn't want to be pulling information from a database over in Australia on a real-time basis. I like to have data local here to North America. But that means maybe we just need a replication process. Every 24 hours, we take the copy from head office and we drop it here in North America, or vice versa. Maybe they have real-time duplication between the different databases. Database culture has been going on for a while. They've probably solved most of these problems, but it's important that you have the ability, the culture to recognize that people should be using the master data, not their own local copy. So once again, just have some meetings, facilitate, collaborate, coach. And if you find inconsistencies, don't worry about calling it out and then fixing it. How's everybody doing so far? Any questions? All righty. Well, we're going to keep on going then. I talked about data owners and data stewards a little bit. Now we're going to dive in a little bit deeper and figure out who they are. So there's actually 5 different roles in the data ecosystem. And that includes the chief data officer, the chief analytic officer, maybe a chief information officer. The roles are slightly different in your big organizations. In the small organizations, you'll be lucky if you even have one. That's why I've kind of grouped them all together. There's somebody called the data owner, somebody called a data steward, a data custodian, and a data consumer. Now let's take a look at who these people are. So the data executive is generally a business function, and they have responsibility for data governance sort of across the organization. They're looking at the information security and compliance, but they're that champion that Judy was looking for. So if you don't have a chief data officer or a chief information officer, you might need to find somebody else to act as a surrogate sort of data executive to promote the need for data, for quality data at the executive level. Then there's the next person is the data owner. And this has to be somebody from the business, most likely at the director level, but could be at the manager level. And they make decisions about the business terms, the definitions. They're the one that know the policies and regulations about updating the data and the governance, data privacy. And they understand the business rules and the processes with regards to where that data comes from and who should have access to it. Where should it be released? Are there any special considerations about, well, I can't send it to that audience, but I can send it over here? The next person is someone referred to as a data steward. Now, they tend to be an employee or a team lead, and they're the one that's actually responsible for fixing the data that's broken. They may or may not be entering it on a day-by-day basis, because hopefully you've got a business process that's auto-generating the data or collecting it when needed. But if there's any errors, that they will be the ones that are in there that are fixing it. They're responsible for the quality of the data. Then there's someone called a data custodian. They're generally somebody from the IT business function, and they're responsible for designing that data warehouse. They're responsible for storing the data, transporting the data, making sure it's secure, and implementing of the business rules. They don't define the data business rules, but they do implement them. Now, I should just, I guess, reflect that these are roles. These are more the job description. But as BAs, you guys are pretty comfortable recognizing the difference between sort of a role versus a title that people have. And of course, the last person that we spoke about is that data consumer. There's data consumers all throughout the organization, all levels, all functions. Everybody in your organization is a data consumer. And there's a bunch of consumers outside your organization as well. You guys publish, does anybody in your organization publish a report, like the annual report that goes outside to stakeholders, or something that gets published, maybe a position paper on new products that are coming? If there's any data in that report, chances are it came from somebody that's had a database somewhere, and it's important that it be accurate. Any questions on those 5 roles? Okay, so one thing that is a little bit tricky sometimes is the distinction between data stewards and data custodians. Data stewards are business people, and data custodians are IT people. It's a distinction being about who's responsible for the content, the actual information that is stored, versus how the information is stored, the what versus the how. So the question is, do you really need all 5? No, you don't. There are data consumers everywhere, both inside and outside your organization. That's a given. You need to have a data owner and a data steward, and that is both business roles. The owner is the one that has the authority to say, yes, we need this data, and this is how we're going to share it, and this is how we're going to do it. As I said, that's more of a director level. And then the steward is more the employee, the person that's making the change. Do you have custodians is really only relevant if you have databases. If you happen to be an organization that's managing off of spreadsheets, you may not have a custodian. But if you have any databases whatsoever, you will have custodians. And then you have your chief data officer on top. Once again, depends upon if you have a large organization or a small organization. Sometimes it's a VP of finance is working in that role as the CIO. Whoever has the CIO, CDO, or CIO may become a CDO. Large organizations separate it, but small organizations keep it together. So what does a BA do to support their data owners? It really is about engaging them in discussion. And you have to respect their role. They're the ones that are responsible for the data, but you may want to help them practice and reinforce their role. Depends how mature your organization is. If you have a bunch of data owners that have never really done data ownership before and they don't really know what they're supposed to do, you're going to have to coach and mentor them and say, well, this is your responsibility. You need to read up on this and you need to make those sorts of decisions. These are some of the things you may want to consider when you're making that decision. It is their choice because they are the data owner, but you can guide them about the things that they need to consider when they're making those choices. And when you're meeting people, if they identify problems, well, remember, call your business owner, call the data steward, redirect stakeholders in the organization to those individuals so that they recognize that they exist and that there is a process for managing this. And finally, once again, reinforce that the business team needs to take ownership of their data. It really is their responsibility to do so. All right, we're getting halfway through here, I think. Actually, we're a little bit more than halfway through. So we've got the data, it has to be clean, we needed some data owners, but if you can't get at the data, if it's not accessible, it's not available, it's not going to be any use to you either. So how do we make sure that the data is easy to use? Well, it has to be easy for the consumer and the data analyst to get at it. And it has to be easy to edit, and it has to be easy to analyze. So you need the appropriate tools. So what are the tools that we need? Data can be in databases or spreadsheets. I'm not fussy about this. I've seen some very complicated data systems run out of spreadsheets. Not saying it has to be in a database, but they need to be on a shared location, whether that's a network drive or in a SharePoint or up on a cloud somewhere or OneDrive, doesn't really matter, so long as it's got a proper security placed around it so that the sensitive data doesn't get leaked. But just making sure that the data is available for people to use. How and what are you going to use for managing access to this data really depends upon your organization and how sensitive things are. Do you need to keep, you probably need to keep your HR data controlled. You probably need to keep your finance data controlled, particularly at the transaction level or at the individual level, because we don't need people to be leaking salary information unless that's something you intentionally want to publish. Usually when data is aggregated or grouped together, it loses the sensitivity, so it's easier to put that in a common location. So usually what I'll find is that, yeah, HR detailed personnel records, that's kept under lock and key and restricted. But then if they aggregate it or anonymize it, that'll be made available for reporting. So I know there's people that still like to keep data on their private laptops and maybe even still in a few filing cabinets here and there, but don't support that. You really need to get people keeping the data in an accessible location where it can be backed up, where it can be shared. And if you can, start them defining that data glossary, defining all of the terms, making sure the data dictionary is available. And that thing called data lineage, which says, well, the data came from this database and then was transformed and now looks like this and is transformed again and presented in the reports. So it's these things that we talk about in the CBAP. I remember reading those definitions of data glossary and data dictionary, and it took me a while to figure out what the differences are, but they are distinct items, and it is important that you recognize what they are. And that you actually support them in your organization. So what is a data glossary? What is a data dictionary? I've told you what data lineage is already. What's a data glossary? What's a data dictionary? Anybody out there remember the terms?
The glossary is more of your definition, where your data dictionary is more of your metadata. Data about the data. That's how I.
Yeah, it's that definition of, so this is the field and this is its data type. And as you say, the metadata, where is it stored and where does it come from? So it's more the technical side of it. The data glossary is more the business side of it. I once worked with a department, Canadian Border Services, it was a long time ago. We had to define what a shipment is. And you wouldn't believe how many people it took us in a room and how many meetings to define what is a shipment. Is it the box that's going across the border? Is it the truck that's carrying 36 boxes? And what if that truck actually has 3 trailers? So is it the collection of all of them? And it was, oh my gosh, crazy, trying to get people to agree on what is a shipment. So this is part of that data governance that we have to talk about, making sure that everybody is comparing apples to apples. You can't compare apples to oranges, it doesn't make sense. So when it comes to reporting tools, there's dozens of them out there. I'm not going to make any recommendations because the tools vary depending upon your need. Some organizations need the tableaus. Some people need Power BI or Click. It really depends upon the type of data you're looking at, the magnitude of it, and the skill level within your organization. If your organization is very data savvy, then sure, take some of those big, powerful tools and off you go. The chances are your organization is just trying to figure this stuff out. And if you give them a tool that's too complex, it's going to scare them away. So start with something that start with Excel, do some charts in Excel, and then migrate up to Power BI, because hey, that's kind of like Excel, but just fancier. And then if you really need some heavy duty lifting for big data, well, that's when you're going to call in the Tableaus or the Oracles or the Cognos solution that's supported by IBM. All right, so how can a BA support making this data available? Once again, speaking upon the business value, making sure it's accessible and available, identifying the opportunities for integration, identifying the common locations. Where are we going to store this information? I'm struggling with this right now with my current organization. As I said, master data management is not their strong suit. So I have some data, somebody else has some data, and we have to identify who's going to be the business owner. And then once we identify it, well, where is it going to be stored? As a BA, I'm helping them make that conversation and have that conversation. Actually, any other questions on this before we proceed? You guys are a very quiet bunch. Maybe it's too late on a Wednesday evening. I'm not sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about data and information management, defining the roles, responsibilities, etc. So I'm going to introduce another framework. I know you guys are all business analysts, but data management has its own body of knowledge, just like project management has its own body of knowledge. And a lot of the elements in the data management body of knowledge are important for those that are interested in the data governance and data management and data analytics world. Do you need to be certified by DAMA? No, but should you read the DM book? Might be a good thing to, it's not like bedtime reading or anything, but it might help you understand some of these concepts or give you another perspective to sort of say, oh, now I see and I understand. And there's many different elements here, things we've already spoken about: data architecture, data quality, the data built, data warehousing, master and reference data. All of these are important. So this is data governance, is making sure that you've identified your stewards and you're identifying the change management practice. Because as we said, new data comes. There's new data types. We need to figure out who's going to own it, who's going to maintain it. When there is a change, who has to be responsible for making that change? And who's going to be responsible for making deciding factors about, well, what do we call a location anyway? What's a region? What's a district? These are key business decisions, key business terms that need to be defined by that governance council with representatives from different departments of it or different functions within the organization to figure out what needs to be together. And then you're going to define the enterprise standards for how to do security and how to do storage. And that's going to be the responsibility of the IT people to implement, but they are business standards of what is the expectation. The business people need to define the quality expectation. And then the glossary, the map, and the reference and master data needs to come along with it, of course. So once again, how does BAs support data and information management? You need to become aware in basic data management and information management practices. I know that's probably an awful lot to chew right now, but it's not that scary and it makes an awful lot of sense. Some of it is probably already in that guide to business data analytics, or if you've read that, it'll be a good foundation for you so it won't seem so far ahead. And you need to promote those data management and information management practices within your organization. Help them understand why it's important to integrate data, why it's important to keep the information secure, and how that's all going to support the decision-making in your organization. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, moving along.
Stephanie, just a quick question.
Yes.
I understand, and I think you touched on this with the question at the start of this too. Understanding how to emphasize the importance of all of this to leadership that may not be believers. Is it again best done on a case-by-case basis to show them what's lacking and what life could be like if it was better? Is that an approach that works from your experience?
It's really about all you can do. Because I've run into situations where they ask me to report on this, and I'm saying, well, I could, but I'm missing half of it. I don't have this data. And it's as simple as last month they wanted me to report. They have a membership list, and they wanted me to report on the number of attendees at a particular workshop and figure out what department they came from. And I said, well, that's in the membership list, so I should be able to join those two lists together. Well, guess what? That membership list, the email addresses were out of date. And on top of that, the first name and last name in this list was 2 separate columns. The first name and last name here was 1 column. But the email addresses sometimes had first name and last name this way, and then sometimes it was that way. And sometimes people logged in from their home email address, not their work email address, which is what they use for registration. So there was nothing that I could do to consistently make a relationship between those 2 lists. And I had to show them the variation to say, look, I can't do this. And then they said, oh, now I understand. They think, well, you've got the names, you've got the email addresses, you should be able to report and make a join. I said, I can't, because as a human, yes, you could. And you could go through it manually, but that's fine. You can do that when there's 50 names, not when there's 5,000 names. And that's the kind of, you're going to have to sort of brute force and show them that why it's important to have, if you pick a standard of first name, last name, then you might be able to break it apart and compare first name and last name. Like even us, as we've registered here, some of us are showing first name, some of us are showing both. If I needed to compare with some other list, I wouldn't be able to do that because there's no consistent format with the way we're sharing our information here in the Zoom. And that's what's important for data, is that the format needs to be defined and it needs to be used consistently. And if it's not, you won't be able to make the connections.
Thank you.
So
Any other questions?
we just have a comment. Judy said in the chat, I feel your pain. So she's very familiar with that conundrum. So she's right there with you, and so am I. So good information.
That's good. That's great. And it's simple. It's like email addresses. But I work in the Canadian government, and some departments put first name dot last name. Other departments, it's last name dot first name. Some departments have first name, last name, and department in the email. And it's like, oh my gosh, you can't, there's no consistency here. Some people were logging, some departments have a bilingual extension, some departments have a unilingual extension. Some departments don't even have like anything that looks like a GC address. They use something completely different. So it's a challenge. All right, so we've talked a lot about the data, making it accessible, making sure it's accurate. But how do you actually change that data culture? And that comes by increasing the data literacy of everyone in the organization. IT people study this when they go through school. My first exposure, I talked about the workplace, but my actual exposure was third year university. I took a database course by Sylvia Osborne. And I figured, well, it's good. This option might be useful to me in my career. Little did I know that that option would be setting me on the course of what I was going to be doing for my career. But not everybody takes a database course when they're going in through university. And even if they're in computer science or business, a lot of people don't realize the value of understanding about relationships of information and how it is the fundamental to everything that we're doing. So it is important to coach, mentor, guide, share what you know about data literacy to others in the organization. So how do you do that? There's formal courses, not necessarily that you as a BA should be doing the course, but encourage the management team to bring in a trainer. But you can do the informal stuff. I'm going to be probably leveraging a lot of this presentation. I'm going to be sharing it with my colleagues at work about why master data management is important and about why data duplication is a problem. So informal sessions, lunch and learns are very helpful. Newsletters, videos, posters. A poster such as this, not that particular one, but I was at one organization and they said, you know what? We put a poster on the door as people were leaving, everybody, but data quality starts with you. And they said that poster, what made such an impression on everybody that all of a sudden they were locking up their filing cabinets, they were sharing the data as they needed to, and the data quality just improved within their organization as soon as they put that poster on the door. Every time they saw that, they got it thinking and the message was reinforced. So it doesn't have to be fancy videos or fancy promotion, but it has to be something that resonates with people. So, and reinforcing it at all levels. There's nothing worse than a VP that says, oh, I don't care about that, just get it to me quick. It's like, well, you need to have everybody on board. If you have VPs saying one thing and a manager on the other side, they're not going to be able to, they don't have the same clout, the same level of authority within the organization. They're just going to jump. So you need to get everybody on board, whether it's business, admin, functional, everybody needs to understand the basics about how do you structure data in a table? Why is it important that data be secure? Why is it important that data have the same format so that you can integrate between two different data sets? These are basic questions. Understanding the difference between what's a date, what's a whole number, what's a decimal number, why you have to represent dates. There's nothing worse than a date with 2-digit year and 2-digit month, because how many ways can you flip year, month, and date around? And if you have month to like 20,000 to, there's not, I hate it because if you get I think Canada and US flip the month and the day around in the two different standards. I tend to use the European standard where I put the 4-digit year first and then the 2-digit month and then 2-digit day, just so it sorts nice and alphabetically, but other people don't. If I see 2022 04 09, is that April 9th or is that September 4th? So part of data literacy is about communicating all of those subjects across your organization. The important, what is data management, what is data governance, and teaching them about all of these things. I've put single and double checks amongst those categories that I think are the most important to share, helping everybody understand what is data governance, data quality, data interoperability and integration, master and data reference management. Okay, so that's 4 different categories that I think are paramount for you to communicate to everybody in your staff. The single checks, those are more for the medium of the road, the analytics experts. They need to understand about data analysis into business information systems and business intelligence, metadata, data architecture, security, some of these other things. But you're going to have different people at different levels of awareness. So what does increasing that awareness do is it allows them to be a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit more capable, and they're applying those techniques, and then generally you'll see your quality improving, which should lead to increasing trust in the reports that you're producing, increasing ability to generate reports actually, and to support that business decision making, as well as to sort of people will realize that, hey, if we modified this process, we could collect that data, or hey, we should actually collect that data during this process. And then that'll all sort of get into the data culture and be able to produce a much more unified perception of what everybody is doing. I had a nice experience today. I thought, well, okay, they're not going to let me see HR data. So I'm going to have to talk to the admins and we're going to have to gather this particular HR data locally. But I don't really want to do that. So just on the off chance, I talked to the admin and they gave me the name of somebody in HR. So I talked to the HR person and I said, I need this data. It's not particularly sensitive. Do you think it would be possible if you could generate a report for me from PeopleSoft? And they said, yeah, I think we can do that. And like, lo and behold, yay, I'm getting the data that I need direct from the single source of the truth. There's going to be no duplication. It's going to be coming to me on a regular scheduled interval so that I can generate report for it. And all because I decided to ask the question, can I have this data? I didn't know the person to go to, but I knew the person who knew the person that I had to go to. So I had to hop a couple chains. But it was about demonstrating the fact of taking the data from that single source of the truth, not trying to recreate the data, not trying to reuse data where I couldn't necessarily get it from somebody else. It would be suspect. Trying to get it from the original system is always the best. All formats work as long as you keep it consistent. That's what Olivia says, for certainly. Oh, the dates. We're having a discussion here about the dates. Yeah, dates are a challenge. So just, I wanted to leave you with another model. This is something that I picked up as a BA. You don't explicitly learn that your responsibility is about organizational change management. But the further and longer I've been a BA, I realized that, yeah, I'm inspiring culture change. I am leading culture change. So I've done a lot of reading in the organizational change management discipline area. And the ProSci model, the ADKAR model, is one that is the most popular. It's a simple little acronym that stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. You have to help people understand that there is a problem and why it's necessary to make a change and the risk of not making that change. And then you have to make sure that they're willing to try to make the change, that they desire to move to this new world. Then give them the knowledge, the actual information, the training, the skills that they can do this transition and work in the new world. Then demonstrate that they're actually having success in this new world and reinforce it, maintain it. So actually, Judy and Kathy, does this ADKAR model maybe resonate with you as a way to help your organization and your executives get on board to make change in your organization?
I like this model. I don't know that I've seen it spelled out this way before. My data's experience is 20 plus years old. So, but I like this. This hits home very much and very, very succinctly.
Oh, great. This actually has nothing to do with data whatsoever. This, as I said, is organizational change. It's a completely different discipline. And at least in my world, whenever we're doing a project, a big project, tends to involve organizational change, which involves a lot of the training and making sure, because if you just have an IT change, chances are the IT change is going to fall apart unless you can change the organizational processes and the organizational thought around that change. So it's kind of neat. I discovered it like you. I just sort of stumbled across it one day and said, hey, that makes an awful lot of sense. So how does this relate to BAs? You need to raise the awareness. What are the limitations of the current approach? And have them have that desire. Why do they need to change? Well, they want to use the accurate data. They want to create the business value. They want to get the business insight. They can't do that with the limitations of what's there today. And then there's the element of, well, there's training and coaching required to get people that knowledge about how to manage the data. You as a BA are going to be coaching and guiding them throughout their journey. And once you've been able to gain that knowledge and gain the information, then you can demonstrate the wins, and that reinforces it. So it becomes cyclical, and that they see more opportunities to improve data governance, gives you better results, gives you better insight, and it becomes this snowball effect. Any thoughts or questions on that? All right.
I just wanted to say, and this is Judy, that, I think this is great. And you can even just start with your immediate team, and then they become, evangelists on all their projects, and it kind of
Definitely.
takes a life of its own.
Definitely. You got to start. You can't boil the ocean, right? So you have to start with your immediate team, get them doing things in a smart, intelligent manner. And then they'll start requesting information from other people and coaching other people. And it does, it's a snowball. Thanks for that, Judy. Okay, so how can a BA enable success? We're getting near the end here, folks. Just a quick little summary. So we talked about transforming the enterprise culture related to data. It starts with developing that accurate quality data, the accessible data, developing the data and information management practices, getting the data literacy and the enterprise data culture. That's what we started at the beginning of this presentation all about. So just wanted to recap that. The major takeaway is that, yeah, as a BA, don't be afraid, drive, reinforce that culture change within your organization. You need to create the environment to get the success. Everybody thinks that being in data analytics is all about the tools and knowing how to use Tableau or knowing how to do machine learning. And yeah, that's helpful. But if you don't have quality data as a foundation, those tools are going to get you nowhere. So you need to have that good quality data to begin with, and you need to have the good corporate culture about generating and maintaining the data. So be that change agent, be the coach and the mentor, and promote the business value, making sure that there is that accurate data, that business is taking ownership, that they're taking responsibility, they're updating it when they need to. Have people stand up and be data owners and data stewards. There's a lot of people do this over the side of their desk. It's lucky if you have people that is their primary role and primary responsibility. But we do need people to stand up and fill in that role. And it needs to be a full-time person. I'm in a little bit of an unfortunate position where I'm a consultant. I'm supposed to be guiding and coaching the team that I'm with about how they're supposed to be doing this. So I need to keep pressing upon them, well, you need to do this responsibility and that responsibility. And they're always telling me that they're already full up and overloaded. So it's an interesting balancing act. And those are sort of the key elements for you to take away. Any closing questions? Comments?
Well, Stephanie, I'd just like to thank you again for this presentation. It's very comprehensive. You've covered a lot of bases here, a lot of territory. And I think you actually gave us a lot of guidance on how we can coach when you're not in control. So, I think my key takeaway is when someone is asking for something and you could have provided better if certain things were in place, if the culture were different, if the data were different, whatever those differences were, whatever the deficiencies are, using that as your platform to get where you want to go, to help nudge them in the right direction. I think that's great.
That's really, as life as a consultant is, it's all about nudging. Yes, I have no authority over anyone. All I can do is show them what's possible. So there you have it. Some practical perspective on how you can transform the enterprise culture related to data and analytics from the working level, and thereby support the objectives of your organization. It's been my pleasure to share these insights with you today. My name is Stephanie Lachman-Doucet, and this is Projerra, the channel dedicated to practical perspectives in business analysis and project management. Please take a moment to click that thumbs up icon and subscribe. Of course, if you'd like to get your practical perspective direct from me, you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or my public pages on Facebook. You can find these links in the notes below. Or perhaps you'd like to invite me to give a presentation to your local IIBA chapter meeting. If so, please help me get connected with the leadership of your local organization. Finally, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any questions that you'd like me to answer? Please leave a note in that section below. Until next time, take care.